I need to get this off my chest, because for the last year, I felt like I was living two different lives. The one where I quietly built something that actually worked, and the one where I was told I was lucky to even have a seat at the table. If you've ever had your boss take credit for something you bled over, you'll understand why I'm telling this story. Stick around because it doesn't end the way my boss thought it would. And hey, if you enjoy hearing stories where karma finally catches up with the people who deserve it, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because you're about to see exactly how that played out in my case. For context, I wasn't a hotshot manager or a flashy consultant. I was just a mid-level analyst at a mid-sized corporation, tucked into the corner of a department that most people ignored. My official role? Data coordinator. That meant spreadsheets, reports, and the kind of tasks that never make headlines but quietly keep the lights on. On paper, my work didn't matter. In reality, it was the glue holding together the only product line that still made the company money. The company was bleeding clients when I first started. No one said it out loud, but the turnover rate was brutal, and the biggest accounts were already shopping around for competitors. I didn't walk in thinking I'd save the day. I just didn't like watching chaos spread. So I started small, mapping processes, documenting what was missing, fixing broken handoffs between teams. Piece by piece, I built a framework that actually made sense. At first, it was just for me, but then the numbers started speaking. Fewer missed deadlines, cleaner reports, clients not threatening to leave every other week. That's when my boss noticed, not because he saw the improvement, but because upper management started asking him what changed. Suddenly, the guy who used to roll his eyes at my late nights and side projects was calling my work our department's initiative. At first, I didn't mind. I thought, fine. If he gets the spotlight and it keeps the whole team safe, that's the cost of doing business. But then things shifted. One afternoon, during a weekly status meeting, he casually suggested I share my notes so he could standardize them. That sounded innocent enough, except when I logged in later that week. My entire folder, months of documentation, process flows, client reports, was wiped, replaced by a single empty directory labeled archived. I asked him about it. His reply, a smirk and a shrug. We don't need your hobby files clogging the system. Stick to what's in your job description. I remember staring at my blank screen, fighting the urge to slam my laptop shut. It wasn't just the hours of work. It was the quiet knowledge that everything I'd built had been saving the company from collapse, and now it was gone. The real punch to the gut came a week later. He walked into our all-hands meeting with a flashy PowerPoint, complete with graphs and process maps that looked suspiciously like my designs, except stripped of detail and slapped with his name at the bottom. He was presenting my work as his strategic framework. I sat there listening to him butcher explanations I'd spent months refining, watching him take nods and applause from people who had no idea what was really happening. The worst part? He locked eyes with me mid-presentation and gave me this smug half-smile, like he wanted me to know he could erase me anytime he wanted. That was the moment something in me shifted. I wasn't angry. Anger fades. I was cold, focused. Because if he thought deleting my files meant deleting my work, he'd made a fatal mistake. He didn't understand what I'd actually built. It wasn't just documents or templates. It was relationships. Every chart, every workflow, every late-night fix had been tied to real conversations with clients, with engineers, with people on the ground who trusted me because I listened when nobody else did. My boss could steal slides, but he couldn't fake trust. And he had no idea how much of it I had quietly earned. I went home that night and wrote everything down, not in the system, not in the company drive, but in my own notebook. Not as a record of what I'd lost, but as a blueprint for what would come next. Because I realized then, I didn't just build a project. I built leverage. And soon he'd learn the difference. The next week was when everything snapped into focus. Our department had its monthly review meeting, the one where managers paraded their so-called strategic initiatives in front of directors who barely knew what any of us actually did. Normally, I sat in the back with my laptop, quietly pushing through whatever backlog hadn't been touched. This time, though, my boss had other plans. He opened the meeting with a grin plastered across his face, projecting confidence that felt paper thin if you knew him like I did. "Today," he said, "I'm going to show you how our department has completely transformed client retention." My heart stopped. He hadn't said we, he hadn't said our team, he said I. And then my slides appeared on the screen. My color coding, my flowcharts, even the little design quirks I'd built in because I never thought anyone else would see them. He launched into his pitch, rattling off buzzwords he barely understood, stumbling through details he had clearly memorized 5 minutes before. At one point, he misread a metric and claimed our client churn rate had decreased by 30%, when in reality it was closer to 13%. The director raised an eyebrow. He waved it off like it didn't matter. I sat there silent, my hands gripping the edge of my laptop so hard my knuckles went white. Co-workers stole glances at me. They knew. Some of them had helped me test these workflows. But nobody spoke up. Nobody ever does in a room like that. Then came the moment I'll never forget. One of the VPs, a sharp woman with a reputation for shredding bad presentations, asked, "Can you show us the documentation behind this? How exactly did you get from raw data to these outcomes?" My boss didn't flinch. He turned, gestured toward me, and said, "Of course, my analyst here has all the notes." The room turned. Dozens of eyes landed on me. I opened my laptop, pulled up the shared drive, and froze. The folder he'd nuked was still empty. No backups, no versions, nothing. I swallowed hard, trying to decide whether to tell the truth, that the files had been deleted, or try to reconstruct something from memory on the spot. Before I could speak, he stepped closer, leaned over my shoulder, and with a little too much force, tapped a few keys. The screen blinked. He highlighted the blank directory and said, "See? This is why I had to rebuild everything from scratch. My analyst's files were incomplete and disorganized. I had to clean it all up myself." Laughter, not cruel, but that awkward chuckle people do when they don't know how else to react. The VP frowned. My stomach dropped. I wanted to shout, to call him out, to show them all the truth. But in that instant I realized something. He wasn't erasing my work. He was erasing his own credibility. Every word out of his mouth, every fake explanation, every flimsy number, it was stacking against him. They didn't see it yet, but they would. The meeting dragged on. He wrapped up with applause, soaking in every nod of approval like it was his birthright. Then he dismissed everyone with a fake humble bow, as if he'd just saved the company single-handedly. Afterward, as people shuffled out, he leaned close enough that only I could hear. His breath smelled like burnt coffee. "You're not needed anymore," he whispered. "Stick to the basics, or you'll regret it." That night, I stared at the empty folder on my laptop until the screen dimmed. He thought deleting my work would bury me. But all he'd really done was hand me a gift. Proof. Proof that I was the only one who actually understood how the system worked. Proof that he couldn't survive without stealing from me. Proof that when the time came, I wouldn't even have to lift a finger. He'd hang himself with the rope he'd just stolen. And as fate would have it, that rope started tightening sooner than either of us expected. Walking out of that meeting, I felt strangely calm. I thought I'd be furious, ready to slam doors and throw accusations, but instead there was this eerie stillness inside me, like when a storm has already ripped through and all that's left is the broken silence afterward. The next morning I did what my boss least expected. I showed up early, logged in, and sent a short, precise email to HR. Due to ongoing hostile work conditions and the erasure of my professional contributions, I'm formally resigning my position effective immediately. No rant, no dramatic outburst, just words, measured, cold, final. Within 20 minutes, my phone buzzed with a call from HR. They wanted to discuss. Translation, they wanted me to reconsider, maybe smooth things over quietly. But my mind was made up. I repeated one line 3 times. I cannot do my job under falsified conditions. By the 4th attempt, they stopped pushing. When I packed up my desk, co-workers watched with wide eyes. Some whispered, a few looked guilty. One guy mouthed, "I'm sorry," across the room. But my boss? He smirked, leaned back in his chair, and said loudly enough for half the floor to hear, "Some people just can't handle the pressure." I didn't respond. I didn't even look at him. I just walked past, badge in hand, and dropped it on his desk without a word. The click of plastic against wood was the only sound I wanted him to remember. For the first week after leaving, I stayed quiet. No fiery LinkedIn posts, no mass emails, no leaks to the press. I let the silence do the work. What my boss didn't realize was that silence from me was louder than any outburst could ever be. Because when I went quiet, other people started making noise. The first call came 2 days later. A client manager from one of our biggest accounts reached out, not to my old email, which was already deactivated, but to my personal number. "Hey, did you leave the company? We noticed the reporting changed, and it doesn't make sense anymore." I told him the truth carefully. I'm no longer with the company. That was it. No bitterness, no poison, just the fact. The second call came 3 days after that. Another client, this one furious, said they couldn't get straight answers about the new framework my boss had promised. They'd relied on my weekly updates for years, and now everything felt like static. I told them the same thing. I'm not there anymore. By the end of the week, I had 6 different calls, some from clients, some from engineers inside the company. The engineers weren't asking about numbers. They were begging for help. "We can't make sense of his documentation," one whispered over the phone. "Everything's breaking. Can you just explain what we're supposed to do?" I didn't. I couldn't. That line had to stay clear, but each call told me the same story. The threads holding the company together had been mine, and now that I was gone, they were unraveling fast. Meanwhile, my boss was busy trying to spin my exit as his tough leadership, weeding out fragile talent. At least that's what a former coworker texted me. But he didn't see what was happening behind the curtain. Clients were already starting to escalate, and directors were getting restless. I spent my evenings writing, not code, not reports, but notes. I sketched out every workflow I'd ever built, every metric I'd improved, every personal connection I'd maintained. Not because I planned to weaponize it, but because I needed clarity. I needed to remind myself that what I'd done was real, that it wasn't gone just because he hit delete. By the second week, I realized something important. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to take him down myself. All I had to do was let gravity work, and gravity in corporate life always starts with clients. So I waited. I listened. And sure enough, the calls kept coming. Not asking if I'd return, but asking if I was available to help in any capacity, under any banner. I wasn't ready to say yes yet, but I knew one thing for sure. My boss had no idea that while he thought he'd erased me, he'd actually cleared the path. And the longer he pretended to own what he didn't understand, the steeper his fall was going to be. 2 weeks after I left, the dominoes started to fall. Slowly at first, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying attention, but I knew what to watch for. And once you've seen the threads holding a system together, you also know exactly where it's going to tear apart. The first sign came in the form of silence. Clients who normally demanded constant updates just stopped responding. On the surface, that might have looked like a good thing, fewer complaints. But I knew the truth. Silence from a client isn't peace. It's the calm before they walk out the door. The second sign was a flood of errors. My old coworkers started messaging me, not to gossip, but to vent their frustration. Reports were going out late. Metrics didn't match. Dashboards that used to run automatically were crashing midweek, and nobody knew how to reset them. My boss kept insisting that the new streamlined framework was an improvement, but his so-called improvements were breaking under their own weight. I later learned that in one director-level call, he tried to cover up the missing data by splicing screenshots from old reports, literally cutting and pasting months-old numbers to make it look like progress. But clients weren't stupid. They saw through it instantly. Meanwhile, inside the company, the stress was boiling over. Finance couldn't reconcile numbers, sales had no talking points, and engineers were tired of being dragged into endless, urgent meetings just to explain why nothing worked. My boss's solution was always the same. Schedule another meeting, add another layer of bureaucracy, talk louder than anyone else in the room. It was like watching a man try to patch a sinking ship with sticky notes. But here's the thing. The clients remembered me. I hadn't chased them, hadn't pitched them, hadn't crossed any ethical lines. But they remembered who had picked up the phone at midnight, who had fixed issues without passing the blame, who had explained things without jargon. They remembered, and they wanted that back. One afternoon, I got a call from a procurement officer at one of the largest accounts. He didn't ask if I was available. He asked when. "We're tired of excuses," he said. "We need stability. If you're building something new, we want in. Name your price." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was opportunity. The kind of opportunity you only get once if you're lucky. So while my former boss was drowning in his own lies, I started sketching out something bigger. A company of my own. Not a massive corporation, not a bloated bureaucracy, but a lean, transparent service built around exactly what clients wanted. Clarity, reliability, honesty. I wasn't reckless. I didn't announce anything. I spent weeks laying the groundwork, filing paperwork, quietly reaching out to people I trusted. The more I listened, the clearer it became. The demand was there, and not just from one or two accounts. Multiple clients were circling, waiting for a lifeboat to jump into. Meanwhile, back at my old office, the storm was getting louder. I heard from a friend that my boss had been forced to host an all-hands crisis call after 3 major accounts filed official complaints. He tried to spin it as temporary turbulence, but the truth was written all over his face. He had no idea how to stop the bleeding. Worse for him, the directors were beginning to notice the pattern. Numbers weren't just bad, they were inconsistent. Promises weren't just broken, they were fabricated. And every time he tried to explain, his story contradicted itself. It was only a matter of time before someone higher up connected the dots. And when they did, they wouldn't just see a struggling manager. They'd see the cracks of someone who had stolen credit, erased contributions, and destroyed the very foundation that had been keeping the company afloat. I didn't need to interfere. I didn't need to lift a finger. Gravity was doing its work. And as I watched the cracks widen, I kept building. Piece by piece, connection by connection, I was laying the foundation for something stronger. My old boss thought he'd buried me, but really, he'd planted me, and now the roots were starting to show. By the time a month had passed, it wasn't just cracks in the old system anymore, it was collapse. The first client to make the jump was one of the oldest accounts the company had. I still remember the procurement officer's voice when he called. Tired, frustrated, but steady with resolve. "We've had enough," he said. "We're pulling our contract. Can you handle us on your own?" That question hit me harder than I expected. Could I? I wasn't running a big firm. I didn't have a corporate army of analysts, salespeople, and project managers. What I had was a laptop, a notebook full of workflows, and my name. But I also knew something my old boss didn't. Trust scales better than bureaucracy. So I said yes. The paperwork was signed within a week. No long RFP, no committee votes, no drawn-out negotiations. They wanted stability, and they wanted it yesterday. And when I delivered the first week's report, clean, accurate, on time, they responded with something I hadn't heard in months: gratitude. Word spread faster than I imagined. 2 more accounts followed, then another. They weren't just leaving my old company, they were seeking me out. "We don't care about titles," one client told me. "We care that you answer the phone, that you actually know what's going on." Each transition was like watching dominoes fall in perfect rhythm. Every client that left meant more pressure on my former boss. Every client that signed with me meant more fuel for what I was building. I wasn't naive. Growth wasn't glamorous. It was late nights, frantic checklists, and moments where I stared at contracts, wondering if I'd just agreed to drown myself in work. But every time the doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the alternative. Sitting in that fluorescent lit office, watching someone else mutilate my work while pretending it was his own. I'd take chaos over humiliation any day. By the end of the second month, I had enough accounts to hire help. Not a bloated team, just two people I trusted implicitly. One was a former colleague who had quietly slipped me a message. If you ever need a hand, I'm done pretending over here. The other was a freelancer I'd met years before who knew the systems better than half the engineers at my old job. Together, we rebuilt the workflows from scratch. Not just copies of what I'd done before, but cleaner, smarter, automated in ways my old boss could never dream of. The reports weren't just stable, they were beautiful. Visual dashboards, instant updates, zero errors. Clients noticed. They didn't just stay, they bragged. And bragging is contagious. One afternoon, I got an email forwarded from a client's VP of operations. It was a single line, originally sent to my old company's leadership. Why are we paying you when my name is giving us double the value with half the nonsense? That email spread like wildfire. Within days, 3 directors from my old company were frantically trying to schedule calls with me, pretending it was just to check in. I didn't take them. I didn't need to. I knew why they were calling. They wanted me to patch their sinking ship. Meanwhile, my old boss was spinning out of control. He doubled down on the narrative that everything was under control. But every lost client was a nail in his coffin, and he didn't even realize he was holding the hammer. For me, though, the shift was seismic. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something real, something mine. The money was good, sure, but it was the freedom that mattered. Freedom to answer only to clients who valued me. Freedom to build without interference. Freedom to prove every single day that the work itself was enough. And as the weeks rolled on, I began to understand something that made me smile late at night. When the reports finally balanced and the emails slowed down. I hadn't just left my old company, I had replaced it. By the 3rd month, the whispers turned into roars. My old company had lost 4 major clients, 3 of which had landed directly in my lap. That wasn't just bad optics, it was existential, and I knew exactly how they would react. First came the friendly outreach. A director I barely knew suddenly wanted to grab coffee. Just to catch up, he said. I declined. Then came the emails, carefully worded, laced with fake warmth. We'd love to hear how things are going for you. Maybe we could explore ways to collaborate? I ignored those too. When charm didn't work, they switched to threats. One morning, I opened my inbox to find a letter from their legal department. According to them, I had unlawfully interfered with existing contractual relationships and was misappropriating proprietary information. In plain English, they were accusing me of stealing clients and company secrets. I sat there, rereading the letter, waiting for the panic to hit. It didn't, because I knew the truth. I hadn't taken a single document when I left. Not one email, not one file. And the clients, they came to me. Every message, every call, every contract they had initiated. If they wanted to drag this into court, I was ready. So I called their bluff. I hired a lawyer, sent back a letter twice as sharp, attaching a neat folder of proof, timestamps, call logs, contracts signed weeks after my resignation. My lawyer's closing line was brutal in its simplicity. Our client welcomes the opportunity to demonstrate in court that your company's losses stem directly from your own managerial misconduct. Silence. No reply. Just like that, the legal threats evaporated, but they weren't done. Next came the corporate PR push. A glossy press release went out. bragging about their new proprietary retention framework and unprecedented growth. I almost laughed out loud. The same week they published that nonsense, I signed another one of their former clients. Then finally came desperation. One Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was the head of the board. Calm, polite, but with an edge in her voice. "We're in a bind," she admitted. "Your former boss hasn't delivered on his promises. We need stability. We'd like you to come back on your terms." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the skyline outside my window. For months I'd imagined this call, them crawling back, and now it was real. But here's the thing. I didn't want to go back, not as an employee, not even as a savior. That world was toxic, broken beyond repair. Still, I wasn't stupid. Opportunity was opportunity. So I told her the truth. I'm not coming back. But if you want my help, I'll offer it. Through my company. On a contract. Transparent, fixed terms, no exceptions. She hesitated, but I pressed on. And one more thing. I won't deal with him. If you want my help, he's not in the room. Ever. There was a long silence on the line. Then she said quietly, "I understand." When I hung up, I felt a rush. Not of triumph, but of clarity. For months my boss had tried to erase me, diminish me, threaten me. And now his own board was negotiating with me over his head. He thought deleting my files would bury me. Instead, it buried him. The board didn't waste much time. Within weeks of my contract kicking in, I started hearing whispers from people still inside the company. Whispers that meetings had turned hostile. That my boss, the same man who once smirked as he deleted my files, was being cornered in front of directors and grilled with questions he couldn't answer. At first, he tried his old tactics. Deflection, jargon, volume. "We're simply realigning our KPIs to match evolving market standards," he said in one meeting. Translation: I have no idea what I'm talking about. But this time, it didn't work. The directors weren't buying it. They had my clean, transparent reports in front of them, delivered through my new company, and they saw the contrast. Crisp numbers, consistent outcomes, no excuses. His slides looked like smoke and mirrors next to mine. The breaking point came during a quarterly review. 3 major clients had already walked. 2 more were on the verge, and the financials were undeniable. A director finally asked the question everyone had been dancing around. "Why are we paying you to fix problems you created?" The room went silent. He stammered, turned red, tried to throw my name into the mix. Well, when he left, he sabotaged, but the board shut him down. "We've seen the proof," they said. "The only sabotage here is your leadership." Within a week, the announcement went out internally. He was being transitioned into a different role. Corporate speak for demotion. From department head to special projects advisor, a glorified babysitter with no authority, no team, and no seat at the table. And here's the part that made it surreal. One of his special projects was to attend the training sessions my company was now contracted to deliver. I'll never forget walking into that first workshop. Dozens of employees sat at long tables, notebooks open, waiting for the session to begin. And there he was, my old boss, sitting in the second row, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't gloat. I didn't even acknowledge him. I just started the session like it was any other, walking through the workflows, explaining the logic, answering questions. But every so often, I'd see him scribbling notes furiously, trying to keep up with the very system he once mocked and erased. That was karma, not me screaming in his face, not me plotting revenge, but him being forced to sit there and learn from the person he'd tried to erase. Meanwhile, my own company was thriving. With every new client we onboarded, our reputation grew. We weren't just a lifeboat anymore. We were becoming the standard. And the irony wasn't lost on me. The system I'd built in secret, the one my boss dismissed as a hobby, was now the very reason his career had imploded. I didn't need to destroy him. He'd done that himself. All I had to do was build and let the truth speak louder than his lies. By the time the dust settled, the transformation was complete. What had started as one client taking a gamble on me had grown into a steady roster of contracts, each one bigger than the last. My little company, 3 people working out of coffee shops and late-night Zoom calls, was now running circles around an entire corporate department. The board at my old company kept me on retainer, not because they liked me, but because they couldn't function without the systems I'd built. Every month, their executives sat through presentations where my clean dashboards made their internal reports look like children's drawings. The contrast was brutal, undeniable, and permanent. And him? My old boss? He faded into the background. His title had no teeth. His influence evaporated. The man who once strutted into meetings with stolen slides now shuffled through hallways like a ghost, reduced to asking junior staff how to run basic reports. I'd see him sometimes during workshops, head down, pen scratching desperately, as if he could claw back the knowledge he'd thrown away. But everyone knew the truth. He wasn't in control anymore. He was just another attendee. Meanwhile, I stopped thinking about him, not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need to. My days were full, calls with clients who trusted me, projects that actually worked, a team that believed in what we were building. For the first time in years, the work felt clean, honest, mine. One evening, months after the chaos began, I sat in my small office overlooking the city. Contracts stacked neatly on the desk. Emails from clients lined up, not with complaints, but with thanks. I thought back to that moment, the empty folder, the smirk on his face, the feeling of being erased. He thought he'd buried me, but all he'd done was clear the ground. Now, the company that once dismissed me was paying mine. The clients that once tolerated excuses were thriving with us. And the boss who once told me I wasn't needed was learning in silence from the person he'd tried to erase. No speeches, no victory laps, just another night of work, the hum of the city outside, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that in the end, the only thing that mattered wasn't revenge or recognition. It was building something that lasted.